I want to start actually going back in history a bit. He seems to be following a playbook similar to when Russia invaded Chechnya in the 1990s. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened during that time?
It's a very interesting story, Sarah, actually. What happened was you had a very new leader of Russia. You had Vladimir Putin, who had just ascended. And he knew that there were problems in Chechnya because this was not a new problem for Russia in general. And what he needed also to do in his own mind was to prove his strength as a president. So he needed to show the rest of Russia that he was really serious. He wasn't going to be like this guy Yeltsin or any of the former leaders, but certainly not like Yeltsin, who was by then sort of a drunken buffoon, if you will, or at least appeared that way on television. He needed to do something strong. And what he chose to do was go after Chechnya, was to actually take a look at Grozny and say, what do I need to do here? Now, he also needed some sort of reason that he could give to the folks, to Russian folks, as to why he was doing this. And so there is credible reporting out there that he actually used his internal intelligence service, the FSB, to bomb a apartment building that was just outside of Moscow. One of the classic, what the Russians often refer to as provokatsiya, it's a provocation, right? And so once that happened, he could say, well, the state now understands that Chechens are about blowing up buildings in Russia, and so we got to take care of this. And take care of it, he did.
Idea, right?
Yeah, it's what's being sort of thrown out as a false flag idea. Once he managed to make that happen, then what he did was just ran into Chechnya and began a war there. It was much harder, I think, than he anticipated. But that's when he started to say, look, what we really need to do is just level places. We need to stop trying to target individuals or the ringleaders. If we just basically make the place dust, then that will bring the Chechens around. And so that's what they did. They basically destroyed it. You've probably seen online, there's descriptions of Grozny as like the most destroyed place on the planet at the time. So that's what came before. And we have yet to see whether or not that's going to fully unfold in Ukraine, but it kind of looks like it's going in that direction.
I have to say that sort of brought up bile almost in my throat, having been in Poland and seeing all the people running, mothers and children running away from this, and the thought of leveling Kyiv and the cities in Ukraine, which are quite beautiful. Do you really think he's going to try to go there? And does he have the capability? Because we are seeing this resistance that is incredibly strong from Ukraine.
It's interesting, coming from an intelligence background, Sarah, it's really hard to predict what exactly is going to happen. The hardest question, which may come later on in our discussion, is what's Vladimir Putin thinking? And of course, Vladimir Putin's mind is a very dark place with lots of cobwebs and other stuff in there. And it's a really hard intelligence question. But it was also a really hard intelligence question to figure out, okay, is he going to go into Ukraine? What is he going to do once he gets there? We had information previously. Of course, we knew that Crimea had been annexed. Right. We saw what happened in Georgia in 2008. So there was no thought that he wouldn't consider this. And of course, not to mention the ongoing war in Donbass, which had been going on for a number of years. So when he did decide to go into Ukraine, then the question was, well, what's going to happen? I think all of us expected that what would happen would be probably a relatively quick victory, but if failing that, what was going to happen is a much longer term war of attrition, essentially, where he would use the Grozny model. I think one of the things that we perhaps didn't take into account, and I'm not privy to the inside information here, but it seems like one of the things that we didn't exactly take into account was how effective and how much will to fight the Ukrainians would actually have. So that was, sort of the big fly in the ointment that I guess, none of us really thought was going to happen.
Yeah, I think also seeing those images of the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, out there saying, I'm not leaving, I'm not taking refuge, I'm fighting with you, were pretty powerful. I want to talk about President Biden's remarks that he made in Poland over the weekend. Let's just listen again to what he said.
One of the oldest human impulses, using brute force and disinformation to satisfy a craving for absolute power and control. It's nothing less than a direct challenge to the rule-based international order established since the end of World War II.
So we've seen, Putin use some of these tactics before that you had mentioned. And we just heard from the great-granddaughter of Nikita Khrushchev, who was basically like, look, we didn't expect him to do this, but he went ahead. What are the strategies that he is going to now use? Are we talking scorched earth?
Sir, I come at Biden's comments a little bit differently in terms of what they might or might precipitate inside of Russia and Ukraine. First, I compare it to what I saw, both out of government and back when I was in government, former presidents say. And, you recall any of the phrases that they use. I looked into his eyes and I understood what he was all about. We need to have a reset with Russia. Every time that happened, there would be a lot of teeth grinding back in CIA's Russia operations group, because we have seen this so many times. American presidents who think they can come in and somehow change Vladimir Putin, somehow bring Russia, almost by the scruff of the neck into, a democratic Europe or something like that. I think most people who have either lived in Russia or certainly dealt with Vladimir Putin's government understand that that's not really possible. That's just not going to happen. So when you compare Biden's comments where he has said, look, he's a killer, he's a butcher, he's a war criminal, and then finally, he shouldn't be the leader of Russia. Those are all very true statements. The interesting thing is that I think another comparison to make is if you just look on Twitter or wherever you are on social media and say, what are people saying about Ukraine? And a lot of people are saying, how much is it going to take? How many dead children? How many innocents? How many bombings of those beautiful buildings that we've both seen is it going to take before the U.S. and our Western allies do something? And yet, a lot of times it seems like those same people are now saying, "Oh my God, what did Putin say? Or excuse me, what did Biden say?
Right.
And is that going to screw things up?" And Vladimir Putin has long held that the United States wants him out. He has accused the United States of all sorts of conspiracy theories, Hillary Clinton being in charge of this, that sort of thing. I think we really have to be careful as a nation and our leadership not to self-edit, not to say, well, we can't say the truth because of something that might happen. What's he going to... And my question is, well, first of all, it is true that he shouldn't be in charge of Russia. And secondly, what's really going to precipitate? Is he going to bear down harder in Ukraine, harder than he already is? I doubt it. Is he going to kill more journalists? Is he going to murder more of his own people because of something that President Biden said? I don't think so. I think it is now the time to call it what it is, which is, he is indeed a war criminal who is committing atrocities in Ukraine.
I'm curious about, you heard Nina Khrushchev's remarks about the psychology of when the West says something like this and the reaction from the people. Do you think that she's correct, that this actually bolsters people saying, hey, we've got to support our president because the West is doing exactly what he said that they would do, try to take him down?
Again, I come at it a little differently because where I start from this is, I have seen the level of control that Vladimir Putin's machine has over Russians. So they get none of their information, or very few of them, get anything but the information that Vladimir Putin wants them to see. We've seen over the past couple of weeks, before it was very difficult to get Western news sources and just basic information into Russia. Now, with the clampdown that Putin has instigated, it's even harder. So really, again, we have to be careful not to self-edit. Are we basically saying that had we not said those things, or had Biden not said those things, or had we not imposed sanctions, that the Russians would say, oh, the United States is a wonderful place, we'd like to be more like them? Of course not, because Vladimir Putin controls all the information, and he says there's Nazis in Ukraine. The Americans have these loose values. We here in Russia have these traditional values, which of course is code for anti-LGBT, anti-racism types of, misogyny. So all of those things would have continued regardless, I think, because Putin has an iron grip on the entirety of the country.
You said something interesting. You said that even if Putin were to be, removed or put out of office in some way, that Russia wouldn't necessarily change. Yeah. Why?
Well,
is it the machine? Just
there's a lot. It's a really complex society, married to a very complex political system. And so, no, I don't really think things would change. If there was a scenario where somehow Putin, let's say, died of natural causes suddenly, or was perhaps ousted by an inner circle or something like that, I don't think that we can expect that you would have some sort of Jeffersonian democracy that would then spring forth in Russia, because the people that would replace him, guys like Patrushev, guys like Bortnikov, head of the FSB and the head of the Russian National Security Council, these are people who are essentially just like Putin, with one important difference. The difference would be if they decided that Putin had gone too far, they would say, look, Russia looks like it's beginning to deteriorate, and we need to step in and do something different than what Putin's doing. But by no stretch of the imagination are they pro-Western, democracy-oriented people.
But you would know that there had been a shift in what the FSB decided was too far if this were to happen.
Yes, I think if you had a new group in there that were Putin-like but not Putin,
Yeah.
I think you would probably see a basically regaging of the situation and now how can we walk back? How can we get out of this difficult situation which we now find ourselves in thanks to Vladimir Putin?
Hard to save face. I have a last question, which I know is very hard, but everyone thinks the CIA and former CIA, because you're never former, I'm just saying, knows everything. Predictions? What's the end game here? What will happen?
You know, we are at a really interesting interlude. I think the first chapter is over. So, you know, we saw the Russians come in. A lot of people, to include, I think the Russians thought it was going to go very quickly. It didn't. So now we're looking at a second situation where we're going to transition into something different. And the something different simply depends on whether or not it's going to turn into a long grind like it did for him in Chechnya and Grozny, or whether or not he is going to himself try to find some sort of off-ramp where, say, he says, fine, I'll take Donbass and let me stay in Crimea and we'll call it a day. And how about that, Mr. Zelensky? So that may be where we're headed.
Those two options are still really painful, a long grind or trying to take over just a few places. All of that means that there are so many thousands of displaced people. Steve Hall, thank you so much for your incredible insight. We appreciate you.
My pleasure.